We are in the run up to a general election, and so it's no surprise that tax has become quite the hot topic, with both of the main parties being accused of a conspiracy of silence over how they will use tax to fund some of the public spending that they've set out. There's one area where the Labour Party hasn't been quite so tight-lipped, and that surrounds the taxation of executives within the private equity space. And in particular, they're saying that they're looking to shut down a loophole that they believe will bring in an extra 400 million to 500 million into the Treasury. So, is the private equity sector right to be getting carried away with the potential changes to the carried interest rules? Well, let's just remind ourselves what they are. So, carried interest is a portion of the profits that investment managers earn when certain hurdles within the fund are met. And under the current rules, that portion is taxed at 28%, which is the capital rate, as opposed to 45%, which is what they'd be taxed if it was treated as income. Now, supporters of this say that private equity has a really important role to play in the economy, and that there are characteristics of the capital nature because of the risk and uncertainty over those payments, and also the fact that there's a time difference. So these are payments that are often made much further into the future. Opponents would say, but that's a big difference from what we see in the banking sector and the way that bankers' bonuses are taxed, or indeed the everyday working man. And one person that's got some really strong opinions about that is the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. And she has set out her ambition to ensure that these fund executives are taxed properly. And she said that she'll be reviewing and changing the position in relation to carried interest. But is it as simple as increasing the rates and increasing the amount that the Treasury has to fund some of the other gaps? Well, I think it's important to take a much broader view. As a starting point, the UK has long been established as the heart, really, of the private equity space in Europe. And as a result of that, we attract some really top talent over into the UK. And there's some really big and important funds that are based out of the UK. And that capital acts as growth fuel to really stimulate growth within lots of companies, both within the UK and also beyond as well. And all of that helps contribute to a really healthy economic outlook for the country. It's an important component. Now, critics would say that this just goes absolutely flies in the face of everything that Starmer's saying about having a kind of wealth creation mindset at the heart of his manifesto. And they say that it's going to cause a mass exodus, not only of the actual capital, but also of talent as well, and that we'll see people kind of disappear and relocate to places where it's much more favourable. But if we just put a mass exodus aside for 1 minute, what do I think that we might see? Well, I think it's definitely going to be the case that we start looking at structuring in a different way. And so what fund investment managers will be looking to do is to own their portion in a way that really closely aligns them to capital output. So that could be some shares in the underlying portfolio companies, and or maybe using some special classes of shares like growth shares, because that will mean that they are realising something that's capital in nature and will keep them within that capital gains tax regime, as opposed to them having to pay the income tax rates on that. We may also see that funds are just fundamentally structured quite differently, and ultimately it's only the assets that sit within the UK as opposed to new funds being set up here. So, whilst I don't think anybody's going to take out violins just yet, it has been quite a challenging couple of years for the private equity sector, mainly driven because high interest rates have slowed down the number of deals that we've seen, and the values maybe haven't been quite there. And just as we're starting to see some of the grass shoots of recovery and the deal volume starting to increase, this is a new thing to throw into the mix that creates a bit of ambiguity. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how the sector responds should a Labour government be formed after the next general election.